All right. So I welcome you all on behalf of Think India for the talk that uh, that is upon the India-China relations, past, present, and future. So this has become specifically a hot topic because of the current standing standoff between India and China. And for this topic, we have a very esteemed speaker with us, Mr. N.C. Pipindra. Sir is a editor of Defense Capital, a national military and strategic affairs magazine. He is also a chairman of Law and Society Alliance, a national growth think tank headquartered in Delhi. He is also an advocate practicing in Delhi and Delhi High Court and Supreme Court of India. And moreover, he has also been a journalist for past 25 years for various renowned newspapers like New Indian Express, Times of India, and Bloomberg News as India Defense Affairs Editor. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you,
Sir,
Varun. Thank you for this kind introduction. Yeah.
sir, we would like to start this talk by delving into the past, specifically to understand the mindset of China. So, we would like to first of all address the issue that how did modern day China came into existence in 1949?
Okay. Thank you, Varun, for this very interesting and a nice question. Uh, First, when we talk of history, I think we should not start at the 1949, but we should start at 1911 because modern China emerged as it is today in 1911 when the Chinese Revolution happened. The Qing dynasty was overthrown in 1911 uh, by the pro-democracy forces called as Kuomintang, KMT. That is what they used to be popularly called as. It is a political party, just like the Congress Party in India. They kind of overthrew the Qing dynasty, and then they became the ruling party of the time. Interestingly, KMT is a pro-democracy party, and it was led by a lot of people who would have heard of this. Sun Yat-sen was the leader of that political party at that time. But unfortunately, after they stormed to power in the Chinese Revolution, Sun Yat-sen passed away, and the leadership changed hands to Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang was the leader of China. He was the ruler of China when in 1949, before 1949, there was a power struggle between the KMT forces, which were called as the pro-democracy nationalist forces, and the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party, as you all know, was led by Mao Zedong. He was the leader, both the military leader and the political leader of the Chinese Communist Party, which was formed in 1921. So from 1921 onwards, there has been a love-hate relationship between KMT and the Chinese Communist Party. At, at some point of time, they used to come together. At some point of time, they used to fight against each other. So twice they did an alliance against the uh, against initially against the pro uh, royalty forces. That was in the 1920s, and after that, again in the late 30s, mid 30s, they again came together as a joint force, both military and political, against the Japanese invasion. Japanese had invaded Manchuria, and they had captured Manchuria. To overthrow Japanese out of Manchuria, the KMT forces, which was called the Nationalist Forces, and the Chinese Communist Party's PLA, People's Liberation Army, they came together, and the People's Liberation Army was very successful in that war against the Japanese, and the Japanese were thrown out of Manchuria, and Manchuria came under the Chinese rule. So that is the history behind it. And but soon after the Manchurian War, there was differences of opinion on how to go about forming a coalition government between KMT and the Chinese Communist Party. So in that power struggle, there was civil war that happened throughout the mainland China. Please remember that today's Chinese map is not the original Chinese map. There is a difference. We'll come to it at a later stage, but just to understand that the mainland China is one extreme eastern part of today's China. So there was power struggle, civil war, and KMT was mainly popular in southern. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
You're able to hear me, right? There is no
Yes.
problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So the KMT, as I said, which is a pro-democracy force, which wanted elections and all that, but it's actually quasi-democracy force, which basically became some sort of a dictatorship under Chiang. So there was a civil war that happened in which the Mao-led PLA, they won the war, and in October 1949 they declared the People's Republic of China. The China that existed prior to this People's Republic of China declaration was called as the Republic of China. So now that government is represented by the government that exists in Taiwan. So that is the background. That is how this the present day China came into existence. Is there anything else more you want to know about this? You can ask me.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think there's some problem with Varun's connectivity, so I'll ask the next question.
Please carry on.
Sir, Indo-China relationships during Nehru. So can you highlight what exactly happened and how it went from blind trust leading to an episode of backstabbing?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and thank you for that. In fact, again, I would say that Nehru's relationship with China did not start with 1949. As we all know, India gained independence in 1947, and Nehru became prime minister. But even as a young congressman in the 1920s, the Nehru-China relationship had started. In fact, there was an interesting conference that happened in Europe on China, which Nehru went to attend sometime in early 1922, if I remember correctly, the year. So by the time Sun Yat-sen had passed away, and widow of Sun Yat-sen was attending that particular conference. So young Nehru took a liking to this lady, and they become very good friends. So that is when the Chinese relationship started for Nehru. But let's talk about 1949, when the People's Republic of China was formed. That is when Nehru started exhibiting his love and affection for China, and he, in 1950, within a few months of the declaration of People's Republic of China, India was among the first few countries which gave recognition to the People's Republic of China, headed by Mao Zedong. So, interestingly, the US was a big supporter of the KMT, the previous party before Communist Party of China came to power in the power struggle. So the United States had not recognized the People's Republic of China as the ruling party of China. They were still supporting the Taiwan-based, Chiang-led Republic of China. So that is the kind of submissiveness that Nehru showed as far as China is concerned. So a lot of people say that he was influenced by a lot of external factors. We will not touch upon that. I have already referred to it earlier. But the fact remains that Nehru's relationship with China was one of the biggest disasters that India had ever seen in its diplomacy over the years. So we all know that in 1954, India and China signed this Panchashil Pact. So the Panchashil Pact basically, refers to the 5, diplomatic points that will dictate or mandate the India-China relationship. The first one was this mutual respect for each other. This is territorial integrity and sovereignty. This is very important. I want you to keep this in mind. Mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The second point was mutual non-aggression. This is again another very important point. And the third point was mutual non-interference. All these 5 points are very important. The fourth point is equality and mutual benefit. And the last point is peaceful coexistence. These were the 5 Panchashil points. And as we all know through history, China has deviated or violated each and every one of the five Panchashil points that Nehru signed with China, Mao Zedong's government of that time. So, we all know about this popular slogan of Hindi Chini Bye Bye. This you must have heard of it. It was one of the biggest failures of Nehru diplomacy. So, Nehru was so enamored by the Communist Party of China and Mao Zedong and his Zhou Enlai, who was his prime minister, premier, that he failed to realize what were the true intentions of China. And China never really wanted to respect any of the points that they had agreed upon under Panchashil. So the five principles of peaceful coexistence absolutely became a failure. None of them worked when it comes to the Nehru-led India and Mao Zedong-led China. And this was basically, as you rightly pointed out, Nehru's was blind trust in China and whatever they said. But unfortunately, Nehru himself failed to, he can trust the Chinese. In diplomacy, trust is very important. Without trusting your neighbor or your partner country, you cannot move forward in diplomacy. That is a given. But what you need to do is you also need to verify if what your partner says and does is correct, whether he sticks to all the principles of partnership that you have agreed upon. So that is where he failed. And a lot of people popularly quote Ronald Reagan as having said that trust but verify. That is a very famous quote of Ronald Reagan. So I think Nehru failed to do that. And also, in fact, he failed to even take care of what Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier of the time, said. He said that don't look at what we say, but look at what we do. But what China did in 1962 was a great reminder of how untrustworthy the Chinese were throughout history. Particularly the Communist Party of China, how it was so untrustworthy. When I say China, I am referring to the Communist Party of China led government, not the Chinese people or the China as a nation. Please let us keep that in mind, because it is the Chinese Communist Party's deception that has led to the kind of diplomatic and military problems that both India and China have had over the years, and not the people-to-people relationship. If you go back into history and see the cultural relationship that India and China have, ours is a centuries-old relationship. If you all know, we had a monk, a Buddhist monk from all the way from Tamil Nadu going to China and capturing, rather I would use the word, entering the minds of the Chinese and winning their affection towards Buddhism. The entire most China was Buddhist China, apart from whatever local religious practices and spiritual practices that they had. That is the kind of relationship that India had with cultural relationship that India and China had over the years. So there were a lot of people-to-people exchanges. We all know about various travelers, Chinese travelers, at least a couple of them popular ones traveling to India and learning about Indian traditions and going back. Similarly, we have had a lot of Indian traders and monks going to China and spreading our cultural, nationalism over there. So that was the sort of relationship that we had. But Nehru's blind faith on the Communist Party of China led to a disaster called as the 1962 war. You can ask me the next question.
So what was the outcome of the war? And once the war happened, how were the Indian-Chinese relations rekindled? Like, how did we become friends again?
Okay, very nice. I like the way you are asking questions, because it's kind of moving forward the historical basis of our discussion from past to present to the future. So very good. So the 1962 war and outcome of the 1962 war is what you asked me. See, a lot of people we know that talk that 1962 war was a major defeat for India, and that defeat has settled down in the psyche of Indians for a very long time. I think the time has come for us to shake off that defeatist mentality as far as China is concerned, and then understand that this sort of a propaganda has only helped the Chinese for a very long time. So let us all know that in 1962, it was not just the Chinese who invaded India. Indians also defended ourselves very honorably, and mention-worthy bravery acts were displayed by the Indian soldiers. So it did come as a surprise for Nehru after all the friendship talk that the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China talked with India. Nehru was taken aback. I mean, it's very clear. He was almost shattered by the kind of betrayal that China did in 1962 with India. He never expected this. And remember, this was at the peak of this Hindi Chini Bye Bye slogan, taking over the mindset of the entire Indian population of that time. Despite that, in 1962, the Chinese invaded India over quite innocuous reasons, I would say. Historically speaking, Tibet has been the border or the neighboring country of India since the British period. So the British were very crafty in their geopolitics. We all know that. So when the Britishers were ruling India, they had sort of created this boundary with Tibet as the neighboring nation. Tibet was recognized as a separate nation, and China was Tibet was never under China at that point of time, or ever. In fact, throughout history, Tibet was never part of China. Let us remember that, because we are going to come back to it again at a later stage. So, in 1962, before 1962 happened, in 1949, the Communist Party of China decided to expand its territorial base by invading the neighboring countries. They first invaded Tibet and occupied Tibet militarily. Nehru's biggest folly was that he kept quiet when China invaded Tibet. So, in fact, Nehru gave it to China on a platter. There was not a single word uttered against this invasion. So that gave China an opportunity to change its boundaries, its territorial boundaries, and it got India and Pakistan as its neighboring countries. Otherwise, Tibet would have been China's neighbor. Let us remember that geographically. We'll come back to that once again later. Similarly, at the same time, they invaded a nation called as East Turkestan. Would anybody be able to guess what is East Turkestan in today's name? It's called as Xinjiang. The Xinjiang was originally a country called as East Turkestan. So the Chinese captured it. Let us remember, Xinjiang means new frontier, which is basically a new boundary. That clearly shows that India had invaded East Turkestan and captured the territory to create a new territory, which gave them boundary with countries like Pakistan and countries in like the USSR of that time. So USSR became one of its neighbors by annexing Xinjiang. Similarly, China also annexed southern Mongolia. So by that trickery, China created a boundary with India, and the 1962 war happened because of two important things that happened. One is India in 1958 published a new map claiming the present-day Aksai Chin as part of the Indian territory, the Ladakh region, part of the Ladakh region. They introduced a map and made a formal claim to the territory, which was originally under British rule. So this irritated China a lot because the Chinese thought that it is a part of eastern Tibet. That is what they call Ladakh as. The second thing that happened, incident that happened at the time, was the 1959 exodus of the Holiness Dalai Lama from Lhasa, and he entered India very secretively and sought asylum in India, and the Nehru government accorded the asylum, which was one of the most sensible acts that the Nehru government did in its entire history. So these two actions had irritated China a lot, but those were only peripheral reasons. The actual reason for the 1962 war was that China wanted to expand its territorial authority over the Ladakh region and Arunachal Pradesh, which is called as the Southern Tibet by China. So they laid claim to the entire Ladakh and entire Arunachal Pradesh, and they wanted to take over these two lands. It was the territorial annexation desire of the Chinese Communist Party that led to the 1962 war. In fact, 1962 war shattered Nehru in so much that within 2 years of that war, Nehru passed away. Unfortunately, he passed away within 2 years of that. And we all know what happened to his defense minister, Krishna Menon, and his the army chief of that time, General P.N. Thapar, who was incidentally the father of the Karan Thapar, the journalist today. So P.N. Thapar, General P.N. Thapar had to resign after the debacle. Krishna Menon continued despite the debacle in 1962. I would rather say that India fought valiantly in that battle. We gave them, the Chinese, a bloody nose in a couple of border areas also. That is also fact. Unfortunately, in India, we don't teach history to our students, young students, and create this myopia of what happens in history, and that is precisely what has happened in 1962, and it has kind of given into the hands of the Chinese propaganda that they won this 1962 war in a massive manner. So I think it is time that we should get rid of that psyche and then understand that Indians fought very valiantly during that war. You also asked about what happened, how India-China relationship restarted after the 1962 war. In fact, between 1962 and until 1988, the relationship between India and China was pretty rusty, and it was also very frosty in the sense that in 1975, when Sikkim became part of India, the China protested that Sikkim becoming part of India vehemently. They were quite angry over that what happened in Sikkim with Sikkim, and it was upon Rajiv Gandhi ultimately in 1988 to sort of revive the relationship, diplomatic relationship. The frosty relationship was there was a thaw in the relationship. Both the sides started talking, and Rajiv Gandhi took a trip to China and revived this relationship. So that is what is the 1962 history. Soumya?
Is any significant am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, please.
Sir, do you notice any significant policy changes during the Modi government's tenure?
With regard to China, yes. Not just China, even with Pakistan, there has been a major shift under this Modi government. So, what is the change? In fact, I want to point out that what India did after the terrorist attack in Uri and Pathankot, both the surgical strike that happened and the Balakot airstrike that we did, that has changed the paradigm as far as how India will deal with anybody trying to nibble or attack Indian territory. Only difference is that in Pakistan, we attacked all the terrorist camps. In China, we don't have such terrorist camps which are working against India. So that sort of an action is not possible. But otherwise, what is the change? Modi government took a very pragmatic decision as far as China is concerned. They were very pragmatic. They did make a lot of out-of-the-box efforts, like the Wuhan and the Chennai informal summits that happened. It was out-of-the-box thinking. We gave China an opportunity to rethink its relationship with India and continue with its friendly relationship with India. So that was what the Modi government did. That was the change that we see. But unfortunately, that change has not worked with China. That is what is my understanding of the things. But if there was a change in China's attitude, then we wouldn't have seen what happened in the Ladakh in the last 1.5 months, 50 days now. So I would say that that way, despite a shift in the manner in which Modi government looked at diplomacy, not just with Pakistan and China, but all around the world, the Modi government is much more assertive as far as taking forward the idea of India as an emerging power is concerned. Unfortunately, that has not worked with China. So I think the Modi government will have to live with it and accept it as a failure, and then look forward to make further changes in the policies that we adopt against China. In fact, I would also say that it is time. I think I will take this a little bit forward, not just stick to this, because it is time has come. The time has come for India to completely rethink its relationship with China. Indian government needs relationship, because the Indians have always, in the Indian government has always been conceding a lot of things to China. We have been providing them a lot of concessions. So if I have to point out the concessions, I would say that since the Nehru period, we have made a lot of concessions, like giving up an offer of came our Indian way to the People's Republic of China. In fact, it was a position that the Republic of China, which I talked about, of the KMT government, which was enjoying that position in the UN Security Council of being one of the 5 permanent members. So when that position was offered to India after the PRC was confined only to Taiwan, not PRC, the ROC, Republic of China, India refused. Nehru refused it and offered the position to the People's Republic of China, led by the Communist Party of China. So that was one huge concession that we made, and it was a disaster, I must say. It was a big failure as far as international diplomacy is concerned. See, the other concession that we have been providing is accepting the annexation of Tibet, Xinjiang, southern Mongolia, then southeastern Manchuria by China. I think this one China principle, as China calls it today, the People's Republic of China calls it today, we should reject it completely, and we should never call it as a principle, because principle, when you say principle, it becomes a uncompromising one. You cannot compromise on a principle. But when it comes to a policy, you can always tweak the policy a little bit. So India should follow this idea of that we will not accept this one China policy, and that we will, India probably Modi government should start recognizing Tibet and the Tibetan government in exile more. I think we should also create more relationship with nations like Taiwan, which are also a economic power in terms of electronic goods, microchips. They do a lot of interesting high-tech niche technology work. I think we should benefit from all that, and we should expand our relationship there. So that is as far as the Modi government's policy about China is concerned.
And now to address the elephant in the room, what are your opinions on the current standoff in Ladakh?
Soumya, I'm not able to hear you clearly. There is some background noise. Can you repeat the question, please?
What are your opinions on the current standoff in Ladakh?
Present situation in Ladakh. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have all been reading newspapers. I'm sure we are all knowledgeable that way from what newspapers are reporting. So what happened was, as far as the current Ladakh standoff is concerned, sometime in the first week of May, the Chinese crossed over the line of control in Ladakh areas in a few regions, particularly in area called as Pangong So. So means lake. So Pangong So is a lake basically. It's a boomerang-shaped lake, which is there in the Ladakh region. So 1/3 of that lake is controlled by India, and 1/3 of 2/3 of the lake is controlled by the Chinese. So they crossed over all these 5-6 points and started coming into the Indian territory to oppose some infrastructure construction activities that India has been doing in the recent years in those areas. So in fact, we have a very long road which it's called as the Depsang Chiok DBO road. The long road that passes right parallel to the LAC, very close to the LAC. So, but that was not, the road was not the irritation for the Chinese PLA. The irritation was the feeder road pathways that we are constructing for our patrol, army patrols to do some patrolling in that area, in all these areas. So the Chinese were upset over that because basically, you remember that. Remember that the line of control is basically a infrastructure game. Whoever has a better infrastructure, they are going to be dominant in that area. China has caught up with that infrastructure game long time back. So they constructed roads, they created helipads, they created airstrips, they created a housing facility for soldiers. They created all sorts of infrastructure that are required militarily for them on their side of the LAC. In fact, in 1962, I forgot to mention a point. The point is that the Chinese PLA had occupied certain land. Aksai Chin was also taken over by the Chinese in 1962. We lost some territory in Ladakh region in 1962. So the LAC is basically the point where both the sides, both India and China, accepted a ceasefire, which was offered by Zhou Enlai in 1962. So we were quick to accept that offer because the military, Indian military of 1962 was not that advanced. In fact, we did not use our air force at all during the 1962 war. So the LAC's line of actual control is nothing but the point where the ceasefire happened. But the Chinese PLA has a strategy called as the salami slicing strategy. Basically, what is salami slicing? It is basically a tactics by which you slowly start encroaching on the other enemy's territory. So the current context is also that. I told you it's an infrastructure game. India is late in catching up in this game. We started doing our infrastructure development only from 1999. That is when the Vajpayee government came. Before Vajpayee government, the border policy of India was that we will not construct any roads, we will not construct any bridges, we will not develop any infrastructure. The idea was that by doing this infrastructure, just like what happened in 1962, Chinese can easily make troop movement into the Indian territory and capture Indian territory. So this was a fear psychosis that was in the minds of the Indian government, the previous governments to Vajpayee, and so they did not develop. Under the Vajpayee government, the policy changed. We said that by developing this infrastructure in the borders, our own military troops can move forward easily when there is a conflict. So the Indian government started building bridges, constructing roads, and doing all that since 1999. We allocated some 63 roads in the entire border area with China. And then the work progressed even during the UPA regime. The work progressed very well. The roads are being constructed. But after Modi came, there has been a push to expedite these roads and construct the roads and facilitate troop movement, faster movement. If people had been watching what has been going on in Ladakh, in Arunachal Pradesh regions, we would have heard that India has been constructing a lot of advanced landing grounds. So we have a landing ground in a place called as Daulat Beg Holding, which was started in 2008. It was revived in 2008 after almost 45 years of it being disused. So similarly, there is another called as Fukche. Then there is another one called as Neoma. These three are in Ladakh region. These are all landing strips where Indian transport aircraft can land and take off. So basically, these landing strips are used for faster troop movement and also for people's movement out of Ladakh. Ladakh being a very, what do you call it, as remote area as far as India is concerned. So all these factors must have irritated the Chinese very much that they're constructing our infrastructure faster. But that is again a peripheral reason. The most primary reason is China's expansionist attitude. They want to capture territories that they originally called as the one China. They consider Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh as part of Tibet. I told you that earlier. So they want to capture this territory, and they are trying to nibble at this territory slowly, trying to encroach through their salami slicing strategy. But that is what is the reason for the conflict in Ladakh at this point in time. A lot of people say that because we were getting closer to China, US, because there was, a lot of other issues, geopolitical issues. These are all reasons for what has happened in Ladakh, but I don't think those are, they are all peripheral reasons. The primary reason is the expansionist attitude of China. So what is happening at the moment? As I told you, in May first week, they started coming in to the Indian side of the LAC and trying to stop action work and all. So India matched this. Please remember, when people say that China has fooled India by doing this, I would say we are wrong by thinking like that, for the simple reason that whenever there is a Chinese patrol movement from the Chinese side of LAC, the Indian patrols also mirror their movement. So if they come closer to India, Indian LAC, our troopers also patrol and go and stop them from entering the Indian LAC. This kind of a thing happens on a very regular basis. So we also have this border management agreements, defense agreements that we have. We have about 5 agreements between India and China since 1993. So the last one was signed sometime in 2003, and that agreement was again revived in 2013. So we have these 5 agreements which dictate how both the armies will deal with each other when there is a border conflict. So there are some mechanisms by which we call it as the drill, banner drill. So when the patrols come face to face with each other, they put up a banner saying that this is Indian territory, please go back. The Chinese put up a banner saying this is Chinese territory, please go back. So they slowly go back, and then the tension that prevails in the places diffuse. This is one process that the same process happened even now. So we did that, but the Chinese were more adamant, and we also became more adamant. So that is why the current standoff is happening. When Chinese are adamant, we are also adamant. We will not let them do. We also must have heard about the unfortunate death of our 20 soldiers, officers and soldiers in the clash that happened on June 15. So that happened because as the standoff was going on, both the sides decided to have a higher level military talks. And on June 6th, there was a military talk that happened between the corps commanders from each side. When I say corps commander, let us understand that a corps is almost a size of about 30,000 troops. So that is the size of a command. 30,000 to 50,000 is the size of a command, and corps is slightly below that. Corps is about about 15,000 troopers is what a corps level force is. So the corps commander from both the sides of about 15,000 troopers, who commands the 15,000 troops, they talked and they agreed upon a de-escalation and a disengagement agreement. So the Chinese on June 15th violated that agreement and put up some temporary tents in a territory which India thinks as its own side of the LAC. So Indian soldiers went there and tried to evict the Chinese from that position and asked them to follow the June 6th agreement. So when the Chinese side did not agree, and they attacked our colonel ranked officer, who was the commanding officer, and the violence ensued. So let me tell you, from all the information that I have, that I get, if 20 Indian soldiers were killed in that clash, I can assure you that for every soldier killed, Indian soldiers killed 2 Chinese soldiers. At least uh, Chinese soldiers were uh, dead in that clash. So please let us all understand that we were not in the side that was receiving all the blows. We also gave a bloody nose to the Chinese soldiers on June 15th. So at present, what has happened since then, there was another level of core level talks, core commander level talks on June 22nd. Since then, calm is prevailing in the border areas. The Chinese have gone back to their side of the LAC already in all the places. But unfortunately, in a place called as Depsang, which is very strategically important for India, the Chinese have mobilized division level troops. Division level troops is basically uh, about 7 to 8,000, 9,000 soldiers is a division basically. So the number usually varies based on the components of the division. So it can vary from about 6,000 to 9,000 troopers usually. So that much sized troops have come together in Depsang area on the Chinese side of the LAC. So why is it strategically important for India? Let me just explain that so that you understand. Depsang Valley is very important for India for the simple reason that it is one of our vulnerable areas. If the Chinese decide to do a military operation there and capture that area, India's is strategically important areas like the DBO, the Daulat Beg Oldi airstrip, which is a feeder for the Siachen Glacier. So the Siachen Glacier can be cut off easily by the Chinese. That area, the entire northern part of Ladakh, up to the Siachen Glacier can be cut off by China if they occupy the Depsang Valley. That is why it is strategically important for us. So it will also cut off the Karakoram Pass, which is on the tri-junction of India, Chinese-held Ladakh or Xinjiang, and Pakistan-occupied Gilgit-Baltistan. It is on the tri-junction. We will lose that place also, which are all very strategically important for India. So that is why Depsang is very important. But fortunately, now we are mirroring the kind of mobilization that Chinese are doing. When I say mirroring, what I mean is that if China has brought tanks and artillery guns, soldiers, and other sorts of weaponry to the Depsang Valley, Indians have also brought a division-size force to Depsang Valley to defend the Depsang Valley from any Chinese military venture. Same number of troopers and forces and weaponry is available with India at this point of time. So fortunately, now calm prevails and the de-escalation process has started. But the disengagement, I believe, would take a long time because of the kind of mobilization that Chinese have done. How did China mobilize this much so quickly? That is because they were doing a military exercise in the region very close to the LAC recently, in sometime in March, April. They were doing a massive military exercise there. That is how they were able to mobilize too quickly. Basically, here, as far as the Ladakh, if situation has to become better and peace has to prevail, the only option is for China to fall back to its pre-May 1 position, and China and India accepting and agreeing to both the sides patrolling each other's perceived line of actual control. If you agree on that, only then peace can prevail. Otherwise, there will always be a military tiff, a military tussle in Ladakh and almost the entire 3,500 kilometers of the line of actual control. So some kind of a solution need to be arrived at, and both of them have to stick together. As I said earlier, not only should you trust the Chinese, you should also verify what they are doing on the ground. Only if they implement the agreement that we have agreed upon, only if the terms are followed completely can peace prevail. You can ask me the next question.
Sir, can you please comment on the geopolitical war which China fights through its proxies in Pakistan and Nepal, specifically addressing the Saksham Valley, BRI CPEC, and the Nepal map altercation issue?
Yeah. See, when we say the proxy war that China plays, we should also understand that Pakistan and Nepal also plays the proxy war of China against India. So it is basically a mutually beneficial relationship that China and Pakistan have, and unfortunately now Pakistan also, Nepal also seems to be playing that game as far as India is concerned. So Saksham Valley is also very strategically important. Um, Let me just explain how important Saksham Valley is. I told you earlier that Depsang Valley, how it is important, why Depsang plains are very important for India. Similarly, as far as Saksham Valley is concerned, it is actually in the part of Gilgit-Baltistan, which was ceded by Pakistan to China uh, sometime in 1964. So that such Valley is strategically located in such a way that if the Chinese militarily do some operation there against India, they can easily cut off the entire Saltoro Ridge, uh, which is the southernmost part of the Siachen Glacier, and we will lose Siachen Glacier completely. So also we should remember that the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, infrastructure development work is happening through the Gilgit-Baltistan area, and China has built a huge road that connects all the way from the Tibetan region and goes into Pakistan, or Pakistan held Gilgit-Baltistan to reach the Gwadar port. So that work is going on right now. So that is why India refused to join the Belt and Road Initiative of China, though we were invited precisely for this region. For this reason, why we refused is that if India decides to join the Belt and Road Initiative, we are actually ceding the Chinese the sovereignty over Indian territory. So they are occupied and they have built infrastructure there. If we accept it, then it means that we are accepting that they are not Indian territory. We cannot do that at this point of time. We will not do that. We will never do that. So it is Indian territory, and it's a violation of India's sovereignty, and that is precisely why India is opposing BRI, and we are not willing to join the BRI initiative of China. See, the proxy game that they play, there is another geopolitical dimension to it. If you have been keenly watching and observing, China has been, being the voice of Pakistan in the United Nations Security Council. On more than 2 occasions, China refused to. They actually used their veto to stop the UN Security Council resolutions declaring Masood Azhar of Jaish-e-Mohammed as a global terrorist. This was at the behest of Pakistan, very clearly. Similarly, after India abrogated, or rather after India changed the provisions of the Article 370, and made Jammu and Kashmir the 2 union territories, and also ensured that Jammu and Kashmir becomes fully part of India with no autonomy whatsoever on any matter. China took a resolution to UN Security Council against India's move. I'm sure we all have read that recently. This is again at the behest of Pakistan. Not only that, since we did this Article 370 move, this also brings into question the CPEC project itself. Okay, since it is part of Gilgit-Baltistan, which is now part of the Union Territory of Ladakh. So these are all China's irritants. So they acted as proxies there. As far as Nepal is concerned, China has invested heavily in a lot of infrastructure in Nepal. So probably you all know that China is planning to invest about $8 billion in the hydropower projects of Nepal. They've already invested about $3 to $4 billion. Another $4 billion is left. What is most unfortunate is that India is buying power from Nepal from the same power projects that the Chinese have invested. I think that is one of the actions that India can take. India should stop buying power from Nepal, particularly from the projects where the Chinese have invested. That way we can hurt them economically. So these are the sort of thing that happen. As far as the Nepal's map issue is concerned, historically speaking, the Lipu Lake and Kalapani area, which is between the Uttarakhand state of India and Nepal, has always been under the administrative control of India. It has always been part of India, of the Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand. But suddenly, at the behest of China, the KP Sharma Oli government in Nepal, for various considerations, both political and economic considerations, have decided to side with China in the matter and raise this issue as a pinprick for India. Historically, it has always been with India. Nepal has also conceded it long time back. If you read the newspapers, the Nepalese did this constitutional amendment just recently, where they created a new map. They approved a new map which included this territory, which means till this constitutional amendment, the map, Nepalese map, did not contain this area as part of their territory. That is a fact. So it is quite unfortunate that this has happened. And please remember that the KP Sharma Oli government is a communist government. There is a communist party to communist party links that they have with the Chinese Communist Party. So these are all factors, economic and political, which has made Nepal do what they have done this time. I hope good sense prevails in Nepal sometime.
Sir, can you think India can tackle China militarily? And do you think India needs a military alliance and needs to create some kind of alliance with, say, Quad or some other nations?
It's a very interesting question. See, I earlier pointed out that 1962 is a mental block. So let us get out of that mental block. The 1962 Indian armed forces is not the same armed forces of 2020. So let us remember that. We are a much more modern army, we are a much more modern air force, and we have a much more modern Indian Navy. Can we beat China militarily? My sense is yes, we can, because it is not the numbers. If you take the number, probably budget-wise, we are about $52 to $60 billion annual budget, defense budget. But the Chinese budget is about $168 billion, which is almost 3 times the Indian budget. So if they look at the military, the army, armed forces, Indian armed forces are about 1.45 million. That is about 15 lakh forces. The Chinese have about 20 lakh troopers. But as far as the 20 lakh is concerned, it also consists of reserve troopers. But the standing army, India is the largest standing army today in the world. So on that front also, it is not true that China is much more greater than India. But we should also remember that it is not about the numbers, it is about the quality of your soldiers and also quality of your weaponry and defense systems. As far as the quality of soldiers is concerned, you all know that India's army is a very disciplined army. We are well trained. There is a proper training structure that happens. And also it's a volunteer army. The Indian Armed Forces personnel are all volunteers. They come readily to die for the country. So that is the difference. As far as China is concerned, it's a conscription army. What I mean by conscription army, it's a permanent, permanent and a compulsory military service. You have to come and serve in the armed forces for a minimum of 3 to 5 years. That is compulsory for every youth. So some youth, because it is a compulsion, they come there, but without any commitment to fight. So we also know that their training and discipline is very bad. So one theory says that the June 15th clash that happened between Indian army and Chinese army in Galwan Valley was a trigger because of the indiscipline of the soldiers of China who were there at that spot. So that is their quality. Will the Chinese soldiers die for the country? Maybe some of them would do, but not all. So because there is also, because it is a compulsory military service, there is a lot of heartburn in the soldiers in China. That is what, and there is also huge unemployment in China. We all know that. So that is also a cause of irritation for the youth who join the armed forces compulsorily. In terms of weaponry, the Chinese are ahead of India in only one aspect. That is the strategic weaponry aspect, basically long distance missiles, ballistic missiles. So nuclear armed ballistic missiles. This is where they are much better. They have a better force. They have a better range. They can reach 16,000 kilometers away. Basically, they can fire a missile here in China and it can land in the mainland USA. So that is the kind of range that they have. As far as India is concerned, we have a more missile called as Agni 5, which is about 5,500 kilometer range. Fortunately for India, we can reach Beijing. Our missiles can reach Beijing. So the immediate threat can be neutralized by India using this ballistic missile that can reach Beijing. So that is the only difference that we have. As far as the fighter jets are concerned, please remember that Tibet is at an altitude, about 15,000 meters altitude. It is very difficult for fighter jets to take off from there with a heavy payload of weapons. Whereas Indian jets can take off from, say, the plains of Punjab, some airbase in Pathankot airbase, or any airbase in Bathinda airbase, they can just take off from there, and then they can reach. And there are plenty of air bases all along the Chinese border that we have, both on the Arunachal Pradesh front and on the Ladakh front, from where our aircraft can take off with a heavy payload and bombard the Chinese positions in Tibet. So that way we are much more advantageous. And also remember, I talked about tanks and artillery guns being mobilized by China in Ladakh. Please remember, it's a mountainous terrain, and ask any person who knows some knowledge of tank battles. The battle tanks fear a mountainous terrain because they need a desert or a plain like Punjab or Rajasthan desert for maneuverability. See, tanks cannot stay in one position or go in a straight line. They have to maneuver in a zigzag manner so that they don't become a target of the enemy artillery. But as far as the entire LAC between India and China is concerned, it is a mountainous terrain. If the tanks have to cross a pass, they are stuck. They are sitting ducks in the passes. Indians can easily bombard them. One fighter jet taking off from India can go and bombard them completely. So the tanks are called as armored units. The armored units fear this kind of terrain. So please remember that it's not possible. And Indian infantry is also capable of tackling the Chinese. I would refer all of you to a report that came out just last week called as the Belfer Center report on India-China military capabilities and whether China is superior to India militarily. The Belfer Center report completely denies this fact. It says that India has a better capability of winning a war with China today than ever. I'll just finish with that.
Sir, what do you feel about Indian political parties signing MOUs with Communist Party of China?
Okay. See, that is it has come as a surprise that this happened. I will not take the name of the political party or the political leaders or anything, but I will generally give you my general opinion on this fact. I think this is unheard of before. No political party should ever do that. Why should a political party have a tie-up with another political party which is considered as a adversary nation of India? Everybody says that China is an adversary. We all know that. Since China is a neighbor and an emerging power in the new world order, they are likely to become a superpower. They are probably peaking early. When that is the kind of situation, we should remember that they are never going to let India rise. Because there cannot be two swords in a sheath. There can be only one sword and one sheath. So only China or India can become a world power. Both of them cannot. That is not possible at all. That is geopolitically untenable. So they are not going to let us do that. So when that is the situation, an individual political party or a leader going and signing an agreement with another political party in an adversary country is not good for India's polity, and it's not good for even the political party. The people of the country are not going to accept that. I think I will leave it at that. You want to ask me the next question?
Sir, there are few questions from the audience.
Yes.
Sir, one question is, on what basis or facts China claims excise China, and India always used the Ardh-Johnson line officially, which put Aksai Chin on Indian territory as per British government.
See, I explained this earlier also. Aksai Chin is considered a part of Ladakh, and Ladakh is considered as part of Eastern Tibet by China. Under this one China principle that Chinese government, the Communist Party of China keeps talking about, they are bent upon taking over the land which they say historically belongs to them, which is a lie. It is a lie that Tibet ever belonged to China or even Xinjiang ever belonged to China. But unfortunately, that is what they claim, just to claim superiority of the Chinese race and the Chinese rule. In fact, you will be surprised to know they even claim Nepal is part of China. There are theories that Chiang of KMT, which says that Nepal was part of China at some point of time, and that Nepal has always accepted the Chinese superiority. This is one of the theories that KMT parties Chiang had propounded, and he had said this even to Nehru. So that is how they claim Aksai Chin to be part of this, and they have already occupied Aksai Chin after the 1962 war. Yeah.
Sir, there is another question from the audience.
Yes.
That is, sir, all provisions of principle of Panchsheel agreement are already represented in customary international law and were present in UN Charter. The treaty both India and China were party to. What was the reason of reiterating them in separate treaty? And if the reason was geopolitical, was it purely, say, a mistake or something like that?
It's a very interesting question. The reason for reiterating that is domestic politics. The Hindi Chini Bye Bye slogan of Nehru and giving it some credibility. So otherwise, you are right that the UN charters on diplomatic relationships all have these provisions already. You are absolutely right on that. But as I said, it's domestic politics that dictated this Panchsheel agreement between India and China. I think I've answered your question on that, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, that is it for today. So
okay.
Thank you for giving such an insightful talk.
Thank you very much. As a closing remarks, I'll just say a couple of things. There are things that are coming as a thought in my mind. So please remember that CPEC also has a military meaning to it, because as part of the CPEC, as per some UN's intelligence reports, under the CPEC plan, India is opposed to it, but China is planning to put up some fighter aircraft manufacturing base along the CPEC. So there is a military angle also to it, and already we know, we must have read reports that China has already put some foot soldiers on the ground in all along the CPEC route already. So there is a military angle also to it. So there was this question about geopolitics, and I remember a few things. Recently, you must have all heard about this formation called as Quad. So the Quad consists of 4 countries, democratically elected countries, which has a democracy as its political system: United States, Australia, Japan, and India. So usually, this Quad, people describe it as a military formation, but I would say that it's not a military formation. Rather, it's a geopolitical formation which basically focuses on enhancing diplomacy among the 4 nations. See, please remember, within the Quad, there are already 3 trilateral arrangements and almost 6 bilateral arrangements working within the Quad. When I say this, what I mean is the trilateral arrangements are Japan, Australia, US is one trilateral arrangement which already exists. And also Japan, Australia, and India, there is another trilateral arrangement which already exists. Under the India, Japan, US trilateral agreement, India conducts this exercise, military naval exercise called as Malabar. We all must have heard about it. Malabar is a trilateral arrangement. But there are bilateral arrangements also: India, Australia, India, Japan, India, US, US, Japan, Japan, Australia, US, Australia. These are all another 6 bilateral arrangements that exist. Please remember. So, unfortunately, China looks at this Quad arrangement as a grouping of nations in the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region against China. And that is where the irritant lies. It is the mindset of China which is causing this kind of arrangement. And I mean, the irritation that happens in the relationship. Otherwise, the Quad is a very benign arrangement, which is beneficial for the 4 countries which are part of it. And there will be higher consultations. If China misbehaves, then obviously the 4 countries will have to come together militarily at some point of time. But as of today, it is not a military arrangement, it is a diplomatic arrangement for geopolitical reasons. So that is one. So I also want to say that China is basically the new emerging global Dr. No. You know who is Dr. No? Dr. No is the most archetypal villain from this James Bond movie called as Dr. No. That movie was also named Dr. No. The Xi Jinping is the newest Dr. No of this world. Why I say that? Because he picks up fights. He has been in power for the last 10 years now, and he has already made constitutional arrangements by which he will continue for a lifetime. We all know that. That is also creating some kind of a mistrust among the Chinese within China, and they are angry about this kind of within the Communist Party of China. There is power struggle going on because of that. But despite that, Xi has picked up geopolitical fights in South China Sea with all the nations in South China Sea. It has picked up global problems by unleashing the coronavirus. When Australia opposed and asked for an investigation, it imposed a tariff on the trade with Australia as a muzzle power to muzzle their voice. And with the US, there is already a new world order tussle that is going on. And with India, they have picked up a military tussle. So world over, Xi Jinping and the People's Republic of China is picking up fights and ends emerging as the world's Dr. No. Incidentally, Dr. No is a 1962 film. Why 1962 is important? Because of the India-China war. So that is why I call Xi Jinping as the Dr. No, the global villain of 2020. With these words, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful talk. And thank you everyone for watching and asking questions. And
I must thank Think India and everybody, all the participants, for giving me this opportunity to be with you. I thoroughly enjoyed this question and answer session. I believe Think India is a forum of youngsters, young minds, and I'm so glad that you could ask me such insightful questions during this short span of time and interaction. I appreciate all of you for this effort, and I thank you for this opportunity. Jai Hind.